direct any comments to the chair, and we'll proceed that way. Excellent. With that, I'd like to recognize Chairman King with the Fisheries Committee.
And I would like to recognize Frank Fisk, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Get this set up here. Okay, I'm gonna find. So the agency recommends passage of Proclamation 1710, the statewide proclamation on the commercial taking of fish and mussels as presented yesterday with the updates for the private lakes and the 2 lakes on RWMA for the take of Asian carp.
Okay. Madam Chairman?
And sorry, ma'am. Also the change for the Hickman Bar river mile designation.
That's Proclamation 17-10.
That's right.
Madam Chairman, the Fisheries Committee met, and we have voted to approve the passage of Proclamation 17-10.
Perfect. Chairman King makes the proper motion for the recommendation from the Fisheries Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Cook and a host of volunteers. Is there any discussion from Commission?
This is as amended, correct?
Yes, it's the fully amended proposal. So your amendment that was adopted yesterday is within this proposal, Commissioner. Any other questions?
Yeah. The amendment was on 1712.
Oh, I apologize. Yes.
Be
So
clear.
was this one an
This was
amended
passed
proposal?
unamended.
Unamended. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that very much. Any further discussion? Any discussion or comments from our partners in the public? With that, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You adopt. Now, to sport fishing. Chairman
Yes.
King.
Frank,
The
you-
agency recommends passage of Proclamation 1712, sport fishing, as presented yesterday, with the amendment to Section 4C that states that the crappie regulations on Herb Parsons Lake would essentially be lifted where there be no creel or length limit.
And we voted to approve that one also, Proclamation 1712.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman King. Chairman King moves passage of Proclamation 1712 as recommended by the Fisheries Committee and amended by the Fisheries Committee. We'll get that right this time. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Baker. Any discussion? Any comments from members of the public? With that, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. You adopt. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thanks.
With that, we'll move into the recommendations from the Budget Committee. Chairman Holbert.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to call on Frank again.
He knows not to sit
Popular,
down now.
you're a popular guy.
I didn't sit down today. Yeah. Well, we had one budget expansion in fisheries that we were requesting. This is to receive $221,500 from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Carp Fund. This is all federal dollars that we matched through the university and with work that we were already doing with our time in TWRA.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, the Budget Committee met and we recommend passage of the budget expansion for $221,500.
Perfect. Chairman Holbert moves budget expansion as described in conversation and discussion. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Swan. Discussion. Any members of the public want to make a comment? Great. We'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You adopt. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chief, very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Great, and with that, as we efficiently move along, and before anybody gets too excited, let's not forget we must take a commission picture after this meeting. Doug is gonna get us if we don't behave on this, so do not disperse before we get that picture taken. I would like to recognize Chris Richardson, actually Chairman Swan, my apologies, Chairman Swan with the Audit Committee.
No problem. You're forgiven.
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Special Assistant to the Director, Chris Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. And by virtue of my place on the agenda, I know I'm the only thing standing between you and adjournment, so I will keep it as brief as I can. However, I do want to discuss the performance audit that was completed by the Comptroller of the Treasury relative to both the commission and the agency. It's good news. This was an audit that the Comptroller performed. Auditors came out, spent some time with us at the agency. They interviewed some of you, they interviewed a lot of us, and through a long and arduous process, they found one finding as what is contained in this audit report. But before I get to that finding, I do want to point out something very important that the auditor noted on page 6 of the report, and that is that the current audit disclosed that the agency has corrected all prior audit findings, including those related to state payment cards, equipment, crop leases, conflicts of interest, and the real system computer access. That's a very significant and unusual statement for an auditor to put in, that all of the prior audit findings that this agency or the commission has dealt with have been completely resolved. So we should be proud of that. We certainly are. You should be proud of that too as a commission. The one finding that the Comptroller's office notes is that the agency and the commission have failed to update or review our threatened and endangered species list. Tennessee state law requires this commission to review and add or make deletions to the state threatened and endangered species list every 2 years. We have not done that since the year 2000. I want you to be prepared because we are going to jump on this audit finding and we are going to address it. We will be presenting a rule amendment to you in December that would provide a new updated list, and I'm excited to tell you that while this finding exists, and it is an administrative finding that we have failed to update that list, it has not prevented us from doing good work relative to our threatened and endangered species. And the list that we will be presenting to you in December will come with several deletions of species that were on the list in 2000. There are some new species that will be added, but the good news is that that important work with those non-game animals has carried forward since 2000. We haven't failed in any way programmatically, but we need to get that list updated. So we will be presenting that to you. The purpose for these performance audits in part is to come along with the sunset review for the commission. And this is a year where the commission is up for a sunset. That procedure within the General Assembly, if the General Assembly doesn't extend or reauthorize this commission, it would go into wind down and then sunset. So we had a hearing with a subcommittee of the Government Operations who deals with sunset legislation on this audit finding, and I can tell you it went very well. Assistant Director May, Assistant Director Wilson, and I went down and we had a very good discussion about this audit. They were impressed that we had one finding. They were very impressed that all prior audit findings had been resolved. But the Comptroller, while not making findings, also has some observations that are contained in here. And many of them we've been discussing throughout the course of this meeting. So it gave us a platform to talk with some of our policymakers about chronic wasting disease. It allowed us to talk about the emerging issues and the river conflicts surrounding paddlecraft. It allowed us to talk about some of the issues and confusion with the difference between fines and court costs when it comes to our citations. So I guess I say all that to say this audit, while a difficult process, has really provided us with a tool and a platform to talk about some things with our policymakers that we really want to. So all in all, it was an extremely good audit for us, and we have successfully moved the sunset legislation through the Government Operations Subcommittee with a unanimous recommendation for a 4-year extension. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commission?
Yeah, Chris, you say we're going to talk about that in December on the species. Who decides that we need 20 species instead of 30 or 10 or 5 or 100?
Our state list is that we have a whole division of the agency, the biodiversity division, that is devoted to considering these non-game species. And our staff spends a lot of time evaluating what species are threatened, what species are in need of management. Now, obviously, there is a federal threatened and endangered species list, And our state list will include by reference all of those species that are on the federal list. But in addition to those, there will be some species and some different classifications that we will recommend to put on the list. And the goal for the agency, and I think the goal for the commission, Commissioner Baker, is to raise awareness that some of these species are potentially problematic. And the goal overall is to keep those species off of a federal endangered list that could have negative effects on development, negative effects on business. That's why we do the work that we do with these species. We don't have a desire as an agency to put a bunch of species on a list so that we can hold up a construction project. We want to put species on a list to make people aware that there needs to be extra protection afforded to these things so that we don't end up in a situation where those permits can't be pulled or that development is halted in some way because of a federally listed species.
Yeah, but I mean, who decides on the number of species that are on the list? That's what do we?
The agency is going to come to you with a recommendation for those species.
We got 20 on it now, is that right?
We don't pick a number. We don't have an arbitrary number that we pick and say we're going to find 20 species to put on a list. We evaluate the species, and whether we recommend them for a list or not, it's dependent on the condition of the species in the state.
And who all decides that we put a species on a threatened list?
I may defer to Director Carter or to Bobby on this. I don't know if you're asking for specific personnel, but it would be those agency personnel that are doing the work in the field that are going to come up with those recommendations.
Okay.
Commissioner Baker, it could be our personnel, but also in conjunction with university folks and people at the Tennessee Aquarium, and just other partners that we have that do this similar kind of work and research.
My biggest concern is that sometimes university professors are not necessarily the most conservative type views. Most of them have a little more liberal views than I do myself and some other people. And I'm concerned that we don't, maybe with that rationale, that real liberal view might be put on this list, and it concerns me when it comes back to affecting my construction projects down the road.
Okay, are there any other questions?
I got one.
Commissioner Cox?
Chris, this is gonna be presented as a rule. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a proclamation now. Rule is a new vehicle.
Correct. It is, based on the statute, we have determined that it is necessary to do this item by rule.
Why did you determine that after all these years?
It has to do with the language of the statute, and a review of all of our proclamations and rules. We found that we had some things technically in the wrong form, whether it be a proclamation or a rule. We have very limited proclamation authority, and we don't have the authority to proclaim a state threatened and endangered species list. That's why it will be done by rule. That is not going to change the practical effect that all we're asking the commission to approve, and all we will be presenting to you is a list of species. There are no additional permit requirements. There are no additional regulations contained in that rule. There are no additional violations. It simply is a list of species that are in need of management.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just so much harder to change when it's in a rule.
We have been having those discussions. One thing that we're going to do to try to protect against having to make changes every 2 years is, rather than list the state or list the federal species, we're going to attempt to draft that rule in a manner where we can reference the Code of Federal Regulations that contains those species, so that if there are changes to the federal list, our state list will automatically reflect those changes. But while I know it's a more difficult process, that is where we are when it comes to the statutory requirement for us to have a list. We don't have any authority to proclaim that.
Okay. I would defer to the chair, but I would like to see or hear the justification for adding a particular species and what the research showed, and for
Have an idea.
when that comes up. This is
Director
obviously a
Carter.
concern to several people, and I'd like to see the justification.
May I be recognized?
Yeah.
So I have a
That's
great
all.
idea, I think. Here's an idea. So one, we are volunteers, and we've slept since last night, and we may have forgotten that we spent about 2 hours in really deep conversation on this just a couple of months ago. So two things, we should absolutely do that. because we'll be considering this again in December, but I'm gonna ask Doug, my friend Doug, to splice the conversation from this debate. It was so thorough and so good. I would really appreciate the memory refresher myself. I know that my colleagues would, so why don't we start with that? If you could splice that and give us a link to the video from our meeting where we received really thoughtful, we had testimony not only from the agency, but from some of the partners who were part of that process. The benefits and challenges that we might want to consider in action or inaction. I think the audit's a significant amount of pressure for action. I think it was Commissioner Woods who made the point that, so if action isn't taken, that means that we don't actually remove items off this and species off the list. And so it was a very, very helpful thing. And so as we all refresh our memories, I'd love to see that link not only after the meeting, but also as we precede December. But when we come in December, we'll probably need we want to make sure that members of the commission have that fresh on their minds, because these are really important questions. And it's been several months since we had that conversation, and so, but it was very, very helpful. And if you will view that as a refresher, I'm confident that members of the agency will spend one-on-one time with individual members of this commission to make sure that each of us are fully informed on this. And so we'll make sure we have time in December on this. But preceding that, my request might be for all of us to refresh our memories personally, to ask our questions and to become informed, so that we can come to that conversation leaning in and knowledgeable. How's that sound? Awesome. Okay.
Any further discussion? Chris, would you mention that the state did, excuse me, bring up the subject of chronic wasting disease?
Certainly, Chairman Swan, there is, like, as I said, a number of observations. They're not findings, but there were observations relative to our chronic wasting disease plan. And because that observation was in there and one that the Comptroller focused on their presentation to government ops, it gave us an opportunity to have much of the same similar conversation that we've been having relative to CWD prior in this meeting. We were able to have that discussion in government ops. And we're going to continue to work with our policymakers and continue to update them and hopefully educate them on the risks of this terrible disease.
Thank you. I'd like to commend the agency and the employees for doing a good job and for us having a very, very fine audit report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
If there's nothing else, that concludes the audit committee.
Thank you, Chairman Swan. With that, we've got just a handful of announcements. I'd love to call on Commissioner Cook just to share a little bit about an information session that will be happening tomorrow on CWD.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I forgot to mention this when Ed was doing the presentation on the conference on CWD, but I've been trying to find some credible research on the urine part of it, how big of a problem it is, and I keep finding conflicting things. So I was talking to Mike Butler about it at the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and I said, could you put me in touch with maybe Dr. Fisher and just see, what he might have to say about it? And then Mike said, well, why don't we just do a conference call? So make a long story short, we have a conference call tomorrow with Dr. Fisher at 12:30 Central, 1:30 Eastern, and any of the commissioners that want to, join in on that, let me know. We'll get you the number. And if you have any questions too, just let me know, and I'll, we can get those questions answered from Dr. Fisher. So it's a really great opportunity. He's I suppose, the world expert on CWD. He's a professor at University of Georgia, and it should be great to get some information from him. So just want to make that announcement.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate our partners at the Federation for helping us do that. That'll be a great learning exercise. And I'll also call on Commissioner McLaren for an announcement on an exciting activity that'll be happening this weekend.
Yes, I just wanted to make everybody aware that tomorrow the Tennessee Farm Bureau Federation, the Tennessee Farmers Co-op, and the Farm Credit of Mid-America have all joined forces and are putting on a Shoot for Hunger. It's a sporting clay shoot there at the Nashville Gun Club. They'll have over 300 shooters in attendance. And fun games besides just the sporting clays. 96 cents out of every dollar goes to Second Harvest Food Bank to help shoot out hunger, I think is the way they put it. And I'd like to challenge our commission to maybe consider having a team shooting next year.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. I think that's a great idea. We've got volunteers on this end, and I bet we do on the left side too, so that sounds great. Middle Tennessee is pretty active this week. I think the Middle Tennessee Amateur Retriever Club actually has a field trial running a retriever field trial from Friday morning. I think they start at 9 to sunset. Then they'll go again Saturday, 8 to sunset, and then Sunday till they finish their business. And for those of you who have been, who are actively involved in retriever sports, great. But for those of you who just want to see what all this fuss is about, come out and see one of our outstanding WMAs out at Pools Knob. And it's one of the properties that we manage. It's one that it's one of the most highly used in the state of Tennessee. And I know that the club would welcome members of the commission and show you around and show you what's happening. So if you have any interest in that, just let us know. With that, any other announcements? Commissioner Cox.
I'd like to compliment those of us that got to go to Cherry Creek Grill last night. Former Commissioner Chase's restaurant. We had a great meal, and most especially thanks to Commissioner Woods for hosting us, and it was delightful. So thank you very much.
Yes. Commissioner.
Thank you. I told you it was going to be big.
You did not disappoint. It was incredible. It was wonderful to be in this community to celebrate. You know, you always think about when tragedies happen, all of the stuff that goes wrong, but what you see with the volunteers, with the agency, with the Park Service, with the leaders of this community, with the small business owners, there's so many praises that come. And last night we got to see this community roll out the red carpet for not only us, but folks from all over the planet. People were coming in, visiting from all over the state, all over the country. And it's exciting to see that business is increasing here. And thank you for hosting us. It was very kind. Great. Any other announcements or comments? Yes, sure. Director Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Just a quick note. Most of y'all are familiar with working with Danette Wall. Danette's always here at the commission meeting, and Barbara Toon. And we now have Jennifer Weaver. Jennifer joined us this last week in the director's office there. So when you call in or when you come by, you'll be working a lot with Jennifer. I just want to make sure, raise your hand, Jennifer, so that you know who she is, and look forward to working with y'all the same way you've worked with the other folks.
Great. Thank you. We look forward to working with you, Jennifer. Unless there are any other announcements for the good of the order, one more request, as my friend Doug, we're going to go in the room where retention and recruitment met this morning. We'll take our picture, and I know that folks will, I'm sure, want to say goodbye to some of the guests that were here. So please do not leave, and let's try to efficiently get over there so we can make sure Doug gets the picture. So thank y'all so much, and meeting is adjourned.